Have you ever felt like reality is crumbling around you? Imagine discovering that what you love the most could be your worst nightmare. This is the story of David and his son, Lucas, one night when the thin line between reality and terror vanished forever. David had had an exhausting day. Nights with his son Lucas were his moment of peace, a comforting ritual in the midst of chaos. David was a single father, a strong and resilient man who had done everything possible to raise his son in an environment full of love and security. Since his wife had passed away in a tragic accident 2 years ago, David had dedicated every moment of his life to Lucas, striving to be both the father and mother the boy needed. Lucas, 7 years old, was a bright and curious child, always full of questions and eager to learn about the world around him. Despite the loss of his mother, he kept a sparkle in his eyes, an innocence that David valued more than anything else. Every night, David would read him a bedtime story, a tradition they both cherished and which helped them feel connected, even on the hardest days. That night, as he tucked Lucas in and said goodnight, he noticed something different in his voice, a tremor he hadn't heard before. "Daddy, please, check under the bed to see if there are any monsters," Lucas said, his eyes wide and voice shaky. David smiled, thinking it was another childish request to prolong bedtime. He bent down, determined to show Lucas there was nothing to worry about. But when he looked under the bed, his world froze. There, under the bed, was his son, Lucas, curled up and trembling, whispering with a broken voice. "Dad, there's something on the bed." David stepped back, his heart pounding. He slowly turned toward the bed where his son had just been. But the child now lying on the bed wasn't Lucas. His eyes were dark voids, devoid of life, and his smile stretched in an unnatural, cruel way. Trying not to lose his sanity, David wondered if he was dreaming, if his exhaustion was making him hallucinate. But the child under the bed whispered again, this time more desperately. "Dad, please, don't let him hurt me." The David on the bed began to laugh, a hollow laugh that echoed off the room's walls, amplifying the terror. David felt his strength leave him, his legs shaking. He tried to pull Lucas out from under the bed, but the boy resisted, as if something invisible was holding him. The lights flickered, and the room filled with dancing shadows. The air became dense, suffocating. The laugh of the imposter on the bed grew louder, turning into a sharp, piercing scream. David knew he had to act fast. With titanic effort, he pulled Lucas with all his strength, freeing him from the invisible grasp that held him. He hugged his son tightly, unsure if what he was holding in his arms was real or an illusion. They ran out of the room, leaving behind the echo of the laughter and the whisper of the darkness. As they ran down the stairs, David looked at Lucas, making sure he was safe. But in his eyes, he still saw the fear, a shadow that wouldn't easily fade. David and Lucas took refuge in the living room, the bright light of the lamp providing them with momentary comfort. David, trying to calm his son and himself, tried to rationalize what had happened. "Everything's fine now, Lucas. It was just a nightmare, just a nightmare." But Lucas kept trembling. With a broken voice, he said, "Dad, I know it wasn't a nightmare. The monster wanted to take me." From that night on, David and Lucas never slept with the door closed again. The fear of what might be lurking in the darkness had deeply taken root in their hearts. David installed nightlights throughout the house and checked every corner before going to bed. But even though they tried to forget that night, the whispers under the bed and the laughter in the dark became a recurring nightmare, reminding them that, sometimes, the real monstrosity hides in the most unsuspecting places. Days passed, and David noticed something had changed in his house. Sometimes he felt like he was being watched, that a dark presence was moving through the hallways. Lucas also seemed more withdrawn, more scared. The nights were the worst. Every little noise, every moving shadow, fueled their fear. One night, David decided to confront his terror. While Lucas slept in his bed, protected by a faint, comforting light, David took a flashlight and headed to his own room. He opened the door slowly, his heart racing, and knelt beside the bed. With trembling hands, he turned on the flashlight and looked underneath. The empty space stared back at him. But just as he was about to sigh in relief, a whispering voice, the same hollow and cruel voice from that night, echoed in his ears. "You'll never protect him from me, David." I'll always be here, waiting. David backed away, terrified, and turned toward the bed, finding nothing but disheveled sheets. The laughter echoed again, this time closer, more intense. He turned off the flashlight and ran to Lucas's room, hugging him tightly as the laughter faded into the distance. Since then, David knew the fight wasn't over. The dark presence was still there, lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. But he was determined to fight, to protect his son in any way possible, facing the terror night after night in an endless macabre game.